Hey folks, this is Kelani. I'm going to talk to you about the Crusader build that I've kind of settled on for the time being. Now, I'll go through it really quickly. First and foremost, the passives. Now, as a rough rule of thumb, I'd recommend having Heavenly Strength and Righteousness. They seem to be rather staple. And then the other two can be used depending on what abilities you're using. I'd take something which increases your survivability, such as Vigilant, Wrathful, Renewal if you're running a block build, although I'd probably still recommend Wrathful, I'll be honest. Or Holy Cause. I knew I was missing one. Holy Cause. If you have a holy damage weapon, Holy Cause is probably one of the best passives you can use. Now, with the second one, I'd recommend using this depending on what kind of build you're running and what skills. So, for example, Iron Maiden for a Thorns build. You can use Blunt for hammer builds. Maybe run into Long Arm of the Law if you don't really have another use for this little passive. Finery's an okay DPS boost, but if you're running Bombardment, I'd recommend Lord Commander. If you're not running Lord Commander but you're running Bombardment, I'd say you're doing something wrong. Now, I'll quickly go through. Primary, I'm using Justice with Crack because it seems to be the nicest kind of mix of how many targets I'm hitting for how much. So we got Justice on the 240% weapon damage now, and Crack, which splits into two smaller hammers, or has the 80% chance to give 175. Now you note that is actually higher than Smite's damage, but Smite does hit an extra target. What's fantastic is that Justice goes the entire length of your screen, meaning that you can very happily snipe things off or anything that's running away. So I'd say Smite is still really nice for reaping, which is really frustrating because if you're in melee and you're having issues with life regen, Smite and reaping is still probably the best, which is annoying because I really dislike the ability. I don't know why, there's just something about it that feels really lackluster. Now for our second ability, note that you can have these in any order. This is just my preferred order. You can have a cooldown or wild card. Now, I use Akarat's Champion with Rally to get our cooldowns back. Pretty much everything we're using has a cooldown. So, every time you deal damage, a 50% chance to reduce the cooldown of skills by 1 second is fantastic, especially with the Spender in this, because it deals damage so many times. Now, this is where I'd actually swap for a lore. If I wanted a lore, such as Laws of Valor with Unstoppable Force or Critical, I'd put it here. Laws of Hope with Wings of Angels, it would go here. If I'm farming something which I don't really care about, and I'm not going to need Akarat's Champion at all, this is where I'd put Steed Charge. This is where I put the Steed. So, that's why I kind of call it the wild card. Now, in your general damage, I'd recommend Condemn. If you're not running Condemn, I'd kind of question why, because the damage is absurd. It's pretty much our highest damaging ability, and if you put it to either Instant or Vacuum, or even Eternal Retaliation, it mixes utility with damage, which is fantastic. And this amount of damage on a 15-second cooldown, obviously before cooldown reduction, is just ridiculous. It really is. I love having it on Unleashed because it's instant. I can just run into something and smash it down, which is fantastic. I love it. Now, moving on, I'd recommend at least one CC ability, either Shield Glare or Judgment. If you're using Shield Glare, I'd recommend Divine Verdict or Zealous Glare, depending on which you prefer. The 20% damage is what I prefer, but you can use it to get a nice chunk of Wrath. It's actually really useful to kind of blind everything, get a bunch of Wrath, and then just stomp on everything with your Spender. It's really satisfying. And then Judgment, I would use Resolved. Not really any contest there. Judgment into Bombardment for guaranteed crits is ridiculous damage. Not really any other way to put it. But the issue that I have with Judgment is that it's not hard CC. It's an immobilize, it's a snare, meaning that any monster which can teleport, can teleport. Any monster which still has an affix which can affect you, such as summoning Frost Orb, summoning Frozen, summoning Arcane Enchanted, they're still going to do it because they're not fully CC'd. And if they're ranged, they're still going to attack you. Whereas Shield Glare is hard CC, meaning that you get a nice breather from any damage. It's also on a shorter cooldown, so 4 seconds and 12 seconds instead of 6 seconds and 20 seconds, which I really like. Now, the spender that I've kind of settled with, and I really enjoy actually, is Fist of the Heavens with Divine Well. So Fist of the Heavens was buffed to bring it up to 340% weapon damage, but the charged bolts were also brought up to deal 340% weapon damage. So let's have a quick look. You use it, and then there's 340 at the location. Okay, and now every bolt that goes out deals the exact same damage and can hit more than once. But with Divine Well, first and foremost, it makes it holy, so any holy damage we're stacking for Condemn is added to Fist of the Heavens as well, which is just damage on top of damage. And because we're no longer using Heaven's Fury, Fires of Heaven, because we're no longer using that, we can happily go with Fist of the Heavens damage on things like boots and wherever else it can be used, instead of having to compete with bombardment damage, which is also really, really nice. Now, the Divine Well rune, as well as making it holy, means that all of the holy bolts which arc outwards shock nearby enemies, or enemies within 18 yards, which is quite a lengthy distance, for 80% weapon damage, and they can hit more than once as well. What's fantastic is that if the mob is large enough, you can basically use Fist of the Heavens, and it'll hit the mob, and then the bolts will hit the mob, and then as the bolts are moving outwards, they'll all shock the mob, which is just brilliant. There really is no other way to say it. It's so much damage. Add that to Akarat's Champion with Rally, and you get so much time shaved off your cooldowns. It just seems to add up really, really nicely. And then to end it off, we've got Bombardment with Impactful Bombardment, because large crits at the end of the day. So, one note is that you can swap some of this around. As I've said, Akarat's Champion can be swapped for any of the Laws or Steed Charge if you're running around on easy things. Justice can be swapped with Smite, and Fist of the Heavens can be swapped with Blessed Shield or Blessed Hammer. As a note, if you're using Blessed Hammer, you should always take Blunt. You should always take Blunt if you're using hammers, and if you're using hammers and taking Blunt, I'd recommend not taking Bombardment and instead taking Heaven's Fury. So just some things to think about, but let's have a play with my build and I'll go and show you what I found this can do. Everything's in its right place, so let's go kill some stuff. So it seems to excel quite nicely, especially when you're confronted with a boss. You saw how quickly Asmodan just died. It's really, really nice with the Fist of the Heavens. It just seems to do quite a nice bit of damage, and it gives a few extra ranged alternatives to the previous build. Also means you don't necessarily rely so much on your lore, although you could still happily use the lore with the reduced wrath costs. You can see, or you did see, that the wrath is still a little bit of an issue, which is kind of annoying. You can obviously use shield glare to alleviate some of that pressure, but the choice is with you. If you have any questions or queries, please leave them in the comment section below, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. Remember to leave a like just below the video before you leave, and if you want to see more, feel free to subscribe. But apart from that, thanks for watching, folks. Good luck and have fun, and as always, I will see you next time.